We'll be reading from Ecclesiastes 3, 9 through 11. Ecclesiastes 3, 9 through 11. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to the end.
Allow me to encourage you to be turning there with me in your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and that's going to be where our text comes from today. We've been looking at wisdom that runs through this book of Ecclesiastes. This book is written by an individual who identifies himself as the preacher or the teacher, depending on your translation. And what he's doing is he seems to be on a quest, trying to find the good stuff in life. What is it that he's going to find that is fulfilling, that is going to be satisfying, that is going to be a life that has been worth living? And what we have found so far in our study is that he often looks in all of the wrong places to find fulfillment and to find the good stuff in life. And he has concluded, after looking at everything that there is to do under the sun, life without God, that everything was like smoke, like vapor, like breath. It's the Hebrew word hevel. Your translation will say futility or meaningless or vanity. And near the end of our study last week, we looked at a shift that the mindset of the author that was very significant, and that was found in verse 24 of chapter 2, where he says this: "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw was from the hand of God." This seems to be the first sort of positive thing that he has to say in the book. After he's looked at everything that the world has to offer, and he's given himself over to wine and to foolishness and to ungodly relationships and poured himself into work, and he's done everything that you know of that others have tried to do to fill the hole within their life. And he says, and all of that was futile. And he said, but here's what I found: there's nothing better than this, for you to find enjoyment. And we talked about that phrase at the end of our lesson last week. It comes from this Hebrew idiom that means to make your soul see the good. To make yourself see the good that is all around you. A big key, perhaps the biggest key, to our happiness in this life and our fulfillment does not depend on the stuff that happens to us, but our mindset. How is it that we view things? How is it that we see the world around us? Are we busy with seeing all of the bad, or do we take time to see the good that exists and to dwell on that? And he's going to sort of circle back around to that idea a little bit in our text for today. But if you have your Bibles open there and you look at chapter 3, he begins this book, or rather this chapter, with a poem where he says that there's a time for this, and then there's a time for that. And what he does is he gives 14 pairs of contrasting life events, things that are polar opposite. There's a time to die. There's a time to be born. There's a time to plant. There's a time to uproot that which is planted. There's a time to love. There's a time to hate. And he goes through sort of encapsulating the entirety of the human experience. That we all have these different stages within our life. And what he wants his readers to understand is that every stage has their appointed place in life. Not that they are all necessarily equally enjoyable or equal blessings to our life, but they all have an appointed place within our life. And what I want us to do this morning is I'm going to give you 3 sort of big picture takeaways from this chapter that I found to be helpful and in many ways challenging for my own self, and maybe it'll be for you as well. And the first observation I want us to make from chapter 3 is that the author says this about God: that he makes everything beautiful. That God makes everything beautiful. He would say that in verse 3. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Literally meaning when the time is right. You know, sometimes we go through seasons in our life that we probably question the truth of that statement. That we begin to look at maybe something that we're dealing with now or something that we've dealt with in the past, and we say, how can it be beautiful? Now, how could it possibly be beautiful that I lost my job? How can it be beautiful that I lost somebody close to me? How can it be beautiful that I got a diagnosis that doesn't look good? How can it be beautiful that I'm struggling to pay my bills? How can it be beautiful that I've been mistreated? And the list goes on and on. And perhaps the best way that I know to wrap our minds around what the author is saying is for us to think about art. This is my favorite piece of art. It was done by my favorite artist. She's also my wife. And many of you who have been in my office, you've seen this piece of art. This isn't her style of painting, but I had asked her to paint something like this for me, and so she did. And you can't see it from the screen, but if you wanted to go in my office and look, those aren't just lines that are on that Bible. She painted every word of Psalm 51 there on this painting. It's beautiful, and I absolutely loved it. But here's the problem with me. I'm somebody who likes to hover, and I like to watch things be done. And that does not work well when you're watching somebody paint a picture. You see, I would wait about 5 minutes, and then I would go and I would check the progress of this. And every time that I looked at it, I thought, I don't know how that's going to be anything good. I didn't understand layers. I didn't understand shadowing. I didn't understand that for something to look beautiful, that first it has to look like a mess. But I'm not an artist. And many of you who are, you understand that there is a process to getting the final picture that it is that you are waiting to see. In many ways, that's sort of what our lives are like. That we can't always understand how certain things can be made into something that's beautiful until that painting, until that piece of art is finished. As I thought about this concept in my own life, I thought about one of the most formative times of my life when Megan and I first got married. Like many of you, we got married at a very young age. We had no money. And our honeymoon was spent in the only place that we could afford to live, the home that we bought, trying to fix it up because it was pretty much unlivable. Stains everywhere, moldy carpet, awful floors, awful walls. We didn't have any money, and we didn't have a big adventure for our honeymoon. But as I look back on that time in our marriage today, I see much more beauty in that than I saw when I was living it. And many of you have probably gone through something like that in your life, where you found yourself in a moment that was challenging, and you thought, I can't wait for this to be over. I can't wait for me to have an easier life. I can't wait for things to be better in my life. And what the author of Ecclesiastes is doing in chapter 3 that has just struck me in my heart in this study is pointing out that one of the things that steals our joy from our lives faster than anything else in this world is whenever we are wishing that we were in a different season of life than the one that we're currently in. Always wanting to be somewhere in the future or somewhere in the past. I came across this poem this week by an anonymous author, and maybe you've read it before. It says, first I was dying to finish high school and start college. And then I was dying to finish college and to start work. And then I was dying for my children to grow old enough for school so I could return to work. And then I was dying to retire. And now I am dying. And suddenly I realized I forgot to live. And whenever I read that, that just struck me right in the heart, because I understand that I have spent much of my life wishing that I was in a different season of life than the one I'm currently in. Sometimes it's about wanting things to be better. Can't wait until I can make more money. I can't wait until we're able to do more fun things as a family, looking for something in the future. Sometimes it's not in the future. Sometimes it's in the past. You know, whenever my family moved here to begin our work, I had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, and that 2-year-old just got her driver's permit last week. Pray for me, please. I'm not sure how this happened. I'm not sure how my little baby is now getting behind the wheel of a car. And sometimes, as a parent, I find myself longing for when I could just hold them in one arm and say, man, I miss those days. And maybe as parents, you've gone through that, or maybe it's about something else. We often use the phrase, man, I wish we could just go back to the good old days. I wish we could just go back to when things were better, to when things were good, whatever that means for you. And if you're somebody who finds yourself reminiscing a lot about the past and longing for the past, I hate to tell you that the preacher of Ecclesiastes has a wake-up call for you. Because he would say in chapter 7, don't say that. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. You see, whenever I find myself longing for a better day in the future, or I find myself saying, man, things were so much better 5 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, I just need to be reminded that's a foolish conversation that I'm having. That it's not from wisdom that I say, man, it used to be better. Or it's not from wisdom that I would look forward and to say, in the future, things are going to be better. Because what we're doing is blinding ourselves to the goodness of God today, in the season of life that I'm currently living. And so the preacher would say, use wisdom and don't think about time that way. Live in the season of life that you're in now. The second big observation I want us to take away from chapter 3 is this, that we won't always understand the big picture. There will be those moments, and you probably have them in your life, where you can look back on good times or maybe even terrible times, and in hindsight, we say is 2020. And so I get to this point in my life that I can look at the storm that I went through or that my family went through, and I can say, that made me stronger, that brought us closer together. And we can see meaning and purpose in some of those things, but there's always going to be elements of life that we just still can't make sense of it. And that's what the preacher says in this chapter, is that even though there are those things that you are going to be able to see, there's also going to be those things that you're never going to be able to see. He would say in verse 11, also he has put eternity into a man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. There is something about the way that God has made us as his image bearers, that we are designed where we long for more. Not more money and more stuff, but more purpose, more meaning, more understanding. There's just something in our bones that tells us that there has to be more to this life than what it is that we're going through, what we're experiencing, what we are seeing. And yet we have to live with knowing that we're never going to figure it all out. And if you're somebody who you need an answer for every question, boy, that's frustrating. I know, because I'm one of those people. The New Living Translation would phrase this verse this way, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. I love that translation because it perfectly captures the meaning of what we're talking about here in this part of life, that we understand that there is a time to be born and that there is a time to die. There's a time to rejoice and there is a time to mourn. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot, and all those 14 things that he lists at the beginning of this chapter. And what we do as people is we pick which season of life we want to be in. And we try to make all of our life line up with those parts that we find to be more pleasing. And in so doing, we miss out on the beauty of how God is shaping us more so into his image. And we can't always see what he's doing. We can't always understand the work of God within our own life, or the life of somebody that we love, or the life of the community, or the life of the church. There's always going to be something that God is up to that we can't fully grasp within our mind. There are going to be times that we don't understand, and there are going to be times that we are longing for greater things of God, and we can't quite find the answer. C.S. Lewis, in his book, Mere Christianity, had this to say. He says, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world, like that. That's what God has done to his people. He's placed eternity in your hearts, that there's something in you that longs for more. And while there are moments that you can look back and you can say, I see what God was doing there, there's always going to be those elements in your life that you say, I still don't know. I'm still not sure what it is that God is doing or what it is that he expects of me. Which leads us to our third and final observation for this chapter today. And it's this, that the preacher would say that you need to see the good and you need to do good in your life. We ended our study last week with that verse that we began this week with, focusing on the importance of us being people who make our souls see the good in life all around us. And sometimes that is difficult, but rest assured, God doesn't tell us to do stuff that we can't do. You can do it. You just got to make yourself do it. And knowing that God is the author of time and the seasons in our life, but also knowing that there are going to be many times that we don't understand what is happening or why. If all of that's true, then how are we supposed to live? And here's what the preacher concluded. He said, I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good, as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil. This is God's gift to man. This is a similar note as what we looked at from our previous chapter of making your soul see good. What's the author getting at here is he wants you to understand this, that since you're never going to be able to figure everything out in life, how is it that you're supposed to live a good life? And he says this, be joyful. Choose joy in this moment. Choose joy in this season of life. Don't long for something in the future. Don't mourn because something in the past was better. None of that's from wisdom. But choose joy in this season of life. And this is important because what we see repeatedly throughout this book is that joy is something that is chosen. Paul would write to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Those commands are things that we're able to do. Joy is chosen. But the author doesn't just focus on choosing joy and choosing to be joyful, but also to do good. Don't just make yourself see good. Be somebody who is doing good. For our kids that are going back to school this year, do good. For those who are on a sports team, do good. If you're single, do good. If you're married or you're widowed or you have children at home or you're an empty nester, you're a full-time employee, you're retired, whatever season of life you're in, do good all of the days of your life. This preacher has been on a quest for finding what is it that's good in this world, and he concludes, rather than just searching for good, we need to be people who are about doing good with the works of our hands. I want us to just remember, as we bring this lesson to a close this morning, the frame of this entire book is about a man who says, if there was no God, what is it that's good in this life? And he concludes, nothing. There are fleeting pleasures that never last. But with God there is joy, and with God there is purpose, and with God there is meaning, and with God there is eternity. That if you are somebody who has committed your life to God, then you can have an abiding joy. You can have life that is more than just for living under the sun, but you're looking for something that's beyond the sun. And if you're a Christian, you have a reason to choose joy, and you have a reason to do good. But if you're somebody who is not a Christian, then you're still living life that's just under the sun. And what the preacher of Ecclesiastes would have you to say is you're going to find fleeting pleasures, but you're never going to be satisfied because God has placed something in your heart, causing you to long for more. That requires your trust, that requires your obedience, that requires your commitment. If there's somebody that's with us this morning and you haven't committed your life to God, we would encourage you to change that today so that your life is about more than just the stuff that's under the sun, but that you're living for something that's beyond the sun. If we can help you in making that commitment this morning, we'd invite you to come as we stand and sing the song of invitation.